Now it's on. We don't have the block with it.
I'll just do my hello everybody. Usually I have to stand on a block. Oh, here it is. Hi, thanks for staying. I'm Trisha Gooditz, and I wanted to get this informational meeting started. We're going to have Brendan and Reverend Cindy talk about sort of the historical context of this potential merger. They have been having conversations with the interim minister at UCMH, and Brendan and the former board president of UCMH had a number of conversations. And then I'm going to go through sort of the process and the meetings that are going to be occurring, because my goal is to provide as much information to the FPC congregation as possible. So when we come to the straw vote, maybe at the end of the year, people will feel as informed as possible. And then Bob Glorioso will be talking about the financial analysis he and his team did and the legal work that's been occurring to date. So first, Cindy and Brendan, would you like to come up? Or just Cindy?
I do the first part, Brendan does the second part. Okay. Sorry, my computer's being weird. There we go. So Brendan and I have been asked to tell you a little bit of the history of how this discussion came about. I'm going to tell you the first part, and then Brendan will take the second. I'm going to go back a little bit further, though, even. When I got here to FPC, Reverend Tom and I had lunch together to get to know each other and set some, covenanting between the two of us. And at some point in that conversation, I think maybe as we're driving through Hudson on the way to lunch, he said, I don't ever want to be pushy in any way, so I've never said anything. But he said, I've always had it in the back of my head that maybe someday it might be sense for Marlborough and Hudson to become a satellite congregation, a second location for FPC as we grow. And so I absorbed that information and held it in the back of my mind. Then in ministry circles, I heard the now Minister Emerita of the Unitarian Church of Marlborough and Hudson talk about how things were going at UCMH. They were smaller now than they had been historically, and their budget was unsustainable. At her own suggestion, she dropped down from being a full-time minister to a part-time minister, I think half-time. And then the next thing I knew, they were talking about with some other smaller churches around them about partnership and collaboration and potential future merger. UCMH tried collaborating with the shared RE program as a starter for that with 3 of the other area churches where they would have a combined religious education program. I think it was Westboro, Northboro, and Berlin. And I thought, okay, well, they're going to go that direction. They're probably not going to partner with us. However, by the year of that exploration with religious education, it hadn't worked out for a number of reasons. And the churches that they thought were most likely to want to enter into merger were like, no, we're sustainable by ourselves, and we don't want to threaten our own church identity. And they pulled out of that. And so I said, throughout all that, I said to Alice, if you're ever interested in collaborating with us, just say the word and we can talk more. For me, this begins even earlier. So let me tell you a little bit about that. I've always been interested in how mid-sized and large-sized congregations can help and support the smaller congregations near them in Unitarian Universalism. I've preached on that in numerous places. I had a sermon I took on the road to guest preach a lot of places about that, including at a regional UU gathering in the Midwest. And I had long conversations about multi-site ministry and different formats it could take with the former UUA Congregational Life Director, Scott Taylor, and attended lots of his workshops when the UUA was more actively exploring these kinds of formats. I was particularly interested in this as a small church minister of a church under 100 members for 14 years, where I knew that my church in Jackson, Michigan, had things that they just couldn't handle doing well because they didn't happen to have among those 80 or 90 members, they didn't happen to have the specific members with specialties that would have helped us do things like have a better website than a minister can develop. I continued to think about how that we could have developed partnerships with the churches in Ann Arbor, Lansing, and Kalamazoo. And so when I came here to a mid-sized church, I continued to think about the role of the mid-sized church in supporting those smaller churches nearby in the areas of our strengths and their weakness. And then during the summer of 2022, I think it was, my friend Julie created a mini conference to talk about creating models for church partnership because she was interested in doing this in the Detroit area. And she knew I had an interest and a little bit of an expertise in it. And so the three of us together, me and Julie and our friend Jenny Barrington, met together in Indiana at a state park and developed a set of plans of how the Detroit church and one or two churches nearby could develop a shared ministry and staff team and share worship together while maintaining two separate bylaws and such, and two separate buildings. And then the plan developed, and it's now the thing. The Detroit and Southfield are sharing a minister and sharing a staff team and are worshiping together every week, sometimes in one building and sometimes in the other. So I was already thinking about this a lot. And then when Alice finally came to me later in that church year and said, let's talk. Let's talk about what we think the potential of what things could look like for UCMH to work with and maybe eventually merge into FPC. At that time, we were thinking it would be a church with two ministers because I didn't know that she was getting ready to retire, and I don't think she knew that yet. So we started thinking about different models, and we talked about the different models that I had explored with Julie and Jenny, and that Scott Taylor had explored at the UUA, and updated with post-pandemic churches collaborating a lot more, and eventually doing things together more and online. And so then, at the end of the 2022-2023 church year, after she and I had a couple of exploratory conversations, we said, let's think more formally about this. Let's bring in our board presidents for a conversation. So Alice and I and their board president, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, who is their board president, and Jenny Edgerton, we met together to explore how we might take first steps with one another. I likened it to two people having some casual get-togethers or outings to see if they wanted to formally date and then maybe down the road get married. So we made some plans for the next year. Some of those plans didn't fully pan out. Some of them did. The ones centered around worship did. One plan was that Alice and I would do 2 or 3 joint worship services or pulpit exchanges throughout the year. You might remember that Joe Jenks came and sang, and Alice and I jointly led that service, which was a blessing because I had COVID and had to do my part from online. And I think Joe ended up with COVID, and the only person here in person was Alice of the 3 of us. And then we offered an Earth Day service where we talked about orcas and things like that. You might remember that one. And then we did a pulpit exchange where I went there and she came here. We also offered to do a lay leader exchange. With her being half-time, they had a lot of empty Sundays, and we don't have enough money in our worship budget to pay for people to preach every Sunday that I'm not in the pulpit. And so we both filled those with lay leaders. And so it was a benefit to both of us to liven that up by having 3 of our lay members go there, and then they sent 2 here because the third one, the dates just didn't work out because of our schedule. So our Ingrid Holcomb and Lisa Fagerstrom and Lindsay LaPointe each did a service at UCMH that year, and some of their members came here. The other thing we planned that was a pretty good success was that we would each take an established program from our church and host it at their church, at the opposite church, hoping that 2 communities would come together in that way. So the thing we planned was that we would offer our Transgender Day of Remembrance service at their church. Unfortunately, that was not well attended. But the thing that they have done a lot and offered at our church was very well attended, which was our first dinner church experience here. And then throughout that year, we had several times when UCMH had no worship plans, since Reverend Alice was part-time now, and so they joined us for worship on those smaller holiday services when everybody's attendance is low, like the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Sunday after Christmas, and so forth. And so it was that we dated casually throughout the 2023 to 2024 church year. And at the end of that church year, Reverend Alice retired and they named her Minister Emerita. And then the next year, last year, we had less formal plans at the beginning of the year since they were starting with a new minister, Reverend Bruce Taylor, who would be half-time on a 2-year contract. And I was going on sabbatical mid-year, so ministerial collaboration was a little bit more difficult. But this is where Brendan stepped in as our board president. And so I'm going to let him talk about everything that happened in the last church year, the 2024 to 2025 church year.
So as usually is the case, Cindy's quite a bit more organized than I am. And when she sent me a copy of what she wanted to say, I said, boy, wouldn't that be a great idea to write down all my thoughts, which obviously I did not. So you're going to have to hear me off the cuff. So for those of you who don't know, I assume most do, my name's Brendan Chetwin. I currently serve as the FPC board president. And I've been on the board I've been the president for just about a year, and then I was on the board for a year prior to that. So last year, sort of from the handoff that Cindy cited, Morgan Wilson, who was the past UCMH board president, reached out to me, and it was earlier this year, and I don't remember the exact month. And what he was looking to do was to start very informal conversations about the prospect of a merger between the two congregations. At that point, UCMH wasn't really ready to share their entire story. We should look at this as, and I take a brief pause in my comments, is that this is both an emotional and spiritual journey for all of us, for both UCMH and FPC, right? And for them to come to the point of formally exploring merger with another congregation is a rather big decision. And it's a hard decision because as those of us who love FPC, the folks of UCMH love UCMH. So it was hard for him and for their congregation to reach out. And so we had informal conversations. I got to visit the UCMH church for the first time, and it's really a beautiful place. I think another conversation, quite frankly, was at the Horseshoe Pub. Again, in the spirit of the informalness of Unitarian Universalism. And those conversations, from my perspective, was an exploration, right? At no point could I commit the church to anything other than having a conversation. And as those informal conversations occurred, we probably had 3 or 4 of them. It was now time to bring it to the attention of the FPC Board of Trustees. And when I did that, it then became the next conversation grew, in which we had members of both the UCMH board and the FPC board have, and these may seem like somewhat formal conversations, but at this point, it was a lot around, what is important to us from an FPC perspective, and what is important to the folks of UCMH. What about their congregation is important? And that is what I hope that these conversations that we're having now as a larger group will entail, which is as members and friends of both communities, the opportunity to express what about this community is important to you. And in addition, what is important to the members of UCMH? What's important about their community as we explore how a potential future community looks. Now, you hear me use the word potential, possibility, and those words may seem like I'm inserting them deliberately and there isn't much behind them. They are deliberately inserted, but from my perspective as a leader, as one of the leaders of this congregation, we as a congregation need to be invested in the process so we can be invested in the result, right? So if at any point throughout this process, and Tricia Gooditz, my vice president, and who's also leading the exploration team, will speak in a few moments. As individuals, feel free to reach out to any of us. If there's any concerns, if there's complaints, if there's things you want to share that are happy, all of it. It does us no good to not have you invested in this process, because at the end of the day, you decide. Not me, not Tricia, not Reverend Cindy. We don't decide for you. You decide if this is the right thing for your community. So right now, where we are is we formed a transition, again, wrong word, exploratory task force, right? To start to talk through some of the various aspects about how a potential future congregation could look. And so this meeting is one of those earlier meetings in the process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tricia.
So I appreciate how Brendan really was careful with the terminology. Before we were a formal group, we were calling it the transition team. And it's not a transition until we vote. So I kind of renamed this team that came together at the end of our last church year, the FPC UCMH exploratory team, which I feel is more accurate. And the team consists of 3 members of FPC and 3 members of UCMH. And the members of the FPC are Bob Glorioso and Margaret Tucker and myself. And 3 from UCMH, and the ministers are ex officio, but still attend our meetings. So when I agreed to be the chair of this process, there were a lot of things to consider. And there was a lot of grief, and there still is on the part of UCMH. So not only do we have to kind of be a little bit linear in providing information to everyone and making sure that you know as much as you need to know, but the team has also had to be really sensitive with the UCMH members who are sort of excited about getting to know us, but there also is a lot of grief about leaving their congregation. So it's kind of a balancing act for me as the chair to make sure we move forward, but also like take time to sort of take the pulse of people and make sure they're doing okay. So I wanted to just really briefly go through this PowerPoint, which I'd sent out before, but I think that was way too early. So this slide, this is like the big overview. There's going to be, there's this informational meeting today, and then there's going to be a shared conversation on September 19th that will include both our congregation and UCMH, with both our congregation and UCMH speaking at that meeting, which is going to be at night from 7 to 9 in the sanctuary. And then there's going to be the September 19th, then there's going to be one in October, which will also be in the sanctuary, but we haven't established a date yet, and I will let people know. And all this moves us forward to a point where the congregation feels comfortable that they can do a straw vote. Okay, Brendan. Can you just sing it, Chris?
Yeah. We're not sure.
So it's the second slide, Chris. So there are 2 thematic conversations that lead into the first large group meeting, which is going to be September 19th. Cindy has already facilitated the first thematic conversation with the first conversation, which was this past week, and then the second one, which will be more focused, I believe, on worship and culture, social justice ethos, and whatever is remaining for the religious education part. That's going to be on September 11th, and it's going to be Zoom. And if anybody needs the Zoom link again, let me know and I can send it to you.
If we don't get to social justice before this 19th, we'll include that in the second batch. It's just kind of too much to get to.
On the 11th, you're saying, or another. Okay. Okay. And then, okay, Chris, next one. So then, Sharon Brownfield has agreed to do the third thematic conversation. Not sure if that's been scheduled yet, but that's around programming, events, things like that. And then the fourth thematic conversation will be with Cindy and Chris talking about sort of so the history of Indigenous land and the historical context of the two churches. And I'm hoping that enough information comes out of that people who attend will feel better informed about possibly developing a new name. If we decide to merge, we're going to need a new name. Next slide, please. So this is what our timeline looks like. So the informational meeting, which is now, we're leading to the first large group meeting, September 19th. Then there'll be another large group meeting. Again, we need to establish the date. And then the straw vote will take place sometime in November or December. We don't have a date yet. And then after the straw vote, if people seem to be inclined that they want to merge, then we will have a formal vote of the congregation sometime probably early next year. And then just a little bit of background of what these thematic conversations look like. And anybody is welcome to come. And they're both for FPC and UCMH members. And it's really kind of an informal conversation. What do you want to know about us? What do we need to know about you? What are the things that you would like to bring into a new church if you come? What are the things that are most exciting and that we need to know about you? And then finally, so this is me imagining what 2026 looks like. We'll continue the thematic conversations as necessary, and that we might have to have more conversations about a particular topic, which is fine, and people will know when those are. Then in red highlights, we will vote to approve a merger if that's the direction that takes place with the straw vote. And then we will decide on a new name for our joint church. And we'll have to do a new covenant and a mission statement. And then there's all sorts of other kinds of administration management things that need to occur in terms of, do we expand the board of directors because we just reduced the number of board directors, those kinds of things, which can kind of get worked out in the spring. So that's what the process looks like. And I know I've been sending out a lot of FPC announcements, but if you have any questions, please follow up with me. I'm really happy to get back to you. So Bob is going to review what he's learned from all his conversations with our legal counsel and his legal analysis, his financial analysis of UCMH's books.
Did we get the slides? Okay. Well, I'll get started anyway. As many of you know, I had a career in academia for many years, and I left academia to go into business. And one of the things I did in business was mergers and acquisitions, and not because I wanted to, but because it was a necessary part of the business. Anyway, so one of the things I learned, in which I shared with everybody, and they initially said, "What?" Yeah, the most important things about a merger are money. If the money doesn't work, nothing works. And the next most important thing is people. And people, that means the people that are being affected, including management, employees, everybody. And that's what we're into right now. So why are finance, did you get it? Yeah. The next slide, please. Why are finances important? Mergers cost. No matter how you cut it, they cost. Legal fees were estimated between $10,000 and $50,000 initially. and it's dropped. So that's good news. I'll tell you why in a minute. The lawyer estimates now 25,000, plus or minus for each church. So there you've got $50,000 to $100,000 on the line. There's other expenses that we could encounter in the process, and there's going to be administrative expenses and things like that, but they're going to be relatively small. The other one is time and energy of the participants. This is not a simple process, as Trish just explained. There's a lot of discussions. It's not just a board of directors making this decision. It's the board of the congregation making the decision. And so now we have to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. So that's what we have to deal with. I used to call them attention units. Well, we call them management attention units, or MAUs, because if you don't have the management attention units, the job doesn't get done. And so that's what we're going to have to make sure we have here. And so the question that we asked first was, can FPC break even in this process? Because we're going to put up money, and we're putting it out right now. Let's go to the next one, Brendan. Legal. I'll answer those questions in a minute. UCMH hired an attorney, Ann Lichtbau of Kastner and Edwards, and we hired an attorney, Jonathan Guest, who's also a minister in UCC, so he's an interesting person. I had a couple conversations with him, and after I did, I recommended that we hire him, and we did. We've hired him. We did not hire him with a retainer. He just wants to be paid by the hour. He loves doing this. He's retired, so he loves doing mergers of churches. So here you go. We got an interesting guy. And he's also worked with Anita on both sides of the table. So with her and on the opposite side. So they know each other, and that makes a big difference because there's a lot of little things that have to get done to make this process work. And here's the next slide, please. No, you're way ahead of me. That's the second slide. That's the third slide. Well, okay. Here are the legal issues. If UCMH dissolves without a legal merger, UUA owns all their assets. And their assets are primarily their church. So that's an issue. If two legally incorporated entities merge, UUA has nothing to say. So therefore, the assets can go to the merged entity. FPC is registered in Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1710. And that's in the records of the State Department right now. Believe it or not, from 1710, our attorney found it. And then we were consolidated with the Acton Universalist Church in 1969 and reincorporated as we are right now as First Parish Unitarian Universalist, Stowe and Acton, etc. They're in the Attorney General's records. I was blown away when I found that out. They're still there. So we also found out, and this is the most important item, because in the beginning of all this, we weren't sure if we were incorporated or UCMH was incorporated. They're incorporated too. So now we're dealing with two incorporated entities. That makes the legal process simple. It's a simple merger of two legal entities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The legal process is smaller and faster. So the lawyers have to assist us moving on, because we've gotten some data, which I'll talk about in a second, but we've got some data from them, and we'll need more. We'll need a deeper dive. For example, we haven't seen their checkbook yet, but we've seen their data from their planning documents and their scheduling process. What slide have we got up there? 21. That one's okay. They have an endowment. They had an endowment when Cindy was first talking to them of about $1 million, 950,000. It's now, as of April, 134,000. They've been going at it. One of the things, I belong to lots of organizations, And one of the things I say to them is the last thing you want to do is go to your little piggy bank and keep spending from it, because sooner or later you're done. And that's what they did. So they have $134,000 in their endowment in April, but they've spent money on the attorney, so I suspect they're probably down to 100,000 right now. They have a UUA account of about 79,000. Some of it's in money that you can have right away, and some of it's in, like our account, our endowment. Having been on the endowment committee for years, I know how the process works. Sometimes you can't take money out. You only can get the dividends, which is the way most of our money is. But they have some that isn't. The church building has been estimated between $600,000 and $1.5 million value. And that means that their liabilities, as far as I've been able to determine, we haven't done a legal dive into their bank accounts or into any legal entities that they've combined or dealt with, like a bank. They like loans. One of the things if you look at their planning documents, they don't have planning documents that say paying off the loan. So my guess is they don't have any. They'll have ongoing operational expenses to keep the building running. That's an old building like this one. As many of you know, we probably have right now somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 worth of things that we have to do. For example, replace the roof on Fellowship Hall. It's reached its dead date, drop dead date. It's past it. So there's little things like that, and that's what those of us on the strategic planning committee figured out 5 years ago. We've got to start going at those problems here, and I'm sure they have the same things because they've been putting no money into their church, the church building, that is. But given all the assets that they have, mainly their building, the probability of break even on our part is very high. So we won't be spending money that we won't get back in the process. If we don't merge, then we'll spend the money. But if we merge, we'll get it back. So let's see, where are we? Okay, given what they have, will probably be less than $100,000 in cash when this is over with at the end of the year, and the next year, and the next fiscal year, June of 26. Their building is their principal asset, and it does happen to be in a prime location. And there was some comments by when we met with the new president, Jen of UCMH. She said the church has already been approached by the town manager, saying he's had some people who are interested in that property. So that's a good sign. Although it's a beautiful church, you'd hate to see it being torn down, but nonetheless, that's potentially a problem you have to deal with. So if it's sold before the merger date that's planned, which is when their last service is scheduled for June of next year, they plan to sell the building by then. Then we're okay. Then a merger would work out just fine financially. If not, then somebody's going to have to pay those ongoing expenses. If we merge before the building is sold, then we will be responsible for their ongoing maintenance expenses, taxes, insurance, et cetera, all the things that's in the annual budget that Lee can tell you all about, line and verse. So that's where we are. So when we met with Jen, we really kind of pushed her a little hard because they hadn't gotten a real estate agent yet. And our attorney has been on us saying they have to get an attorney, because a good real estate agent who's used to dealing with big properties like this, churches, et cetera, things that don't have an immediate application. For example, what do you use a church building for? Now, a friend of ours bought one in Western Massachusetts and lived in it for 2 years, but it took him 2 years to sell it afterwards. I don't think that will be the case in Hudson, because it's a prime location. So we pushed her, and I talked to her this week, and she now is in conversation with a real estate agent. So that's a good sign. If we can get that and get a real analysis of what it's worth from the real estate agent, then we will be able to make some next steps. So as you can tell, this is kind of an ongoing floating process. They don't have resources within their church community to do a lot of this stuff. Financially, if you look at their numbers and their planning sheets, they're terrible. You can ask Lee. He asked me questions about them, and I said, that's it. There's nothing else there. So they really kind of run very, very loose, and there aren't many people. So the real issue is they probably have 30 members right now. Maybe 30 are active. No, not likely. It's more like probably half that. So it's a very small active congregation, although they do have on their books more members. So that's where we are. We need to get the stability of the analysis from the real estate agent. And we have another slide, I think. Was there another slide there? There we go. No, yeah, that's okay. We'll do this one. This is what the attorney has outlined, for our attorney has outlined and has talked with their attorney about. These are the things they're going to do, which is take a look. They have to look at all our records, especially our bylaws and rules and regulations that we have for running our community. Especially the financial side of it. They're going to have to take a look at denominational rules to make sure that we don't get hung up by something in there. So there's a lot of things that go on in the process. So they will prepare all the materials we need for a parish meeting, including the documents that will show the financial and legal things that have to be done in the process. They will look at their documents. They will look at their books. I mentioned to Jen when we met, we're going to need to look at your checkbook one of these days. We have not looked at that. I said, we will have to look at it, but probably we'll do that when we get further down the road for you selling your building. You'll have to do it then. And so we'll get the data at that time. No use in doing it twice because we pay for it then. Every time the attorney looks at something, we pay. So let's do it as part of the sales process, which comes out of the sale price, not out of us. I'm cheap. So they'll do all that work and they'll do things that we need in the process. And they will be able to present to the communities as we go to the merger process. And by the way, those meetings that we're having up, the larger meetings are going to be joint meetings with the people from UCMH. So the September 19th meeting is a joint meeting with them. So we'll get to meet more of the people from that community. And they're nice people. They're a terrific group. They fit right in. I mean, the ones that I've met, I'm very happy with. They're great. Okay, the next slide. There should be one more. Yeah, this is very difficult for them. They're having a hard time. They're short of people. They have an emotional attachment to that building. It's a beautiful building. And they're having a hard time dealing with it. So the process goes slowly, partly because they're just being dragged by their emotions not to do it. And I can feel that when we talk to them. So there's a real sensitivity that we need to have here. So when they come, please be more welcoming than ever. They're going to need our love. Love is important for us in this process. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Here comes Brendan with a mic.
It's just that we're recording the meeting for those who couldn't attend. So if we talk to the microphone,
I'm happy to talk to the microphone. I'm June Mellon. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
That's it.
There we go. So I bet it is really difficult emotionally for the people in the Marlboro Hudson Church. I've had some experience in bringing organizations together, and you can't underestimate the degree of grief, resentment, and if you don't address it correctly, it can turn into hostility, and it can really pollute the new organization and make it harder for the new organization to kind of come together as a loving community, a loving unit. I have a couple suggestions. Suggestion one is, I think you should make really sure that some of the meetings happen there early on in the process. They don't want to be thought of as an also ran kind of church. They want to be heralded for what they're bringing to the merger. And I think part of it is a lot of their grief is going to be about loss of their building. It's a beautiful building. I attended it for a few months when we first moved to Hudson. And I think that we need to see it. So if these people are going to become part of our community, we can understand their grief for it. I mean, we can appreciate what's beautiful and wonderful about their church. And I'm really hoping that in the process of doing this, we'll, identify all of the stakeholders and their various feelings about how this is coming together. And I'm sure there are people who wish that it wouldn't come together, but there's established ways of making this happen that we could bring into this equation. And I'm hoping to hear more about how we're planning to bring all of the people who have an interest here together onto the same page with a lot of respect, almost kind of like a reconciliation would do for how we're going to go about moving forward as a unit if we do decide to merge.
Right on.
I'm Kathy. Hopefully I'm holding, oh, that much better. So as we started going through this, I realized that the members of Marlborough and Hudson are basically going to be spiritual refugees. And as the daughter of a World War II refugee, the things that are extremely important to my mother are some very small things that she has of her father's and other things. And I think I was also looking at, as we're looking at real estate, what does Marlborough and Hudson want to take from this church building? Is there some symbol? And is that something that they have to disclose to the real estate? I don't know if this is something that's been addressed with them.
Yeah, it has.
And I think it's really, really important that we gave them some agency in saying, what of this building would you like to take? And what can we do to make you feel more welcome in this spiritual refugee camp? I know I'm not saying it very nicely, but
If I could speak to that a little bit, Bob.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're really early in our conversations still, but we have in our exploratory team meetings, we have done some talking about symbols that are important and symbols that are different. One of the things that their former board president, Morgan, said to me is he said, I would love it if we could use our chalice in worship at least once a month. I said, I bet that FPC would be pretty open to that. We might even be open to saying, let's use your chalice every Sunday. That's something we're willing to shift and change on. I don't know how attached we are to our chalice. That's not a conversation I've had, but that's a conversation we can be having. And so another thing, they have chimes in their pews that when there are moments of joys and sorrows that they really want to say, this resonates with me, they hit the chimes. And we've talked about trying out the pew chimes here. They have also historical quilts in their sanctuary. And I think we want to make sure that historical quilts come to be part of our shared history. And, there may be ways in which we even incorporate a pulpit into our facility or other sanctuary furniture and other trappings. This was one of the things where I'm saddened in our own history that when I look around our building, I don't see much that clearly is Acton in here. That it's a lot of Stowe. We have Acton silver. I think a couple of the things in the stairwell over here might be about the Acton history. But I think we've learned from that too, how we can do better at making sure that we are welcoming and incorporating their culture into ours. So one of the things I want to say is this isn't a decision to just say, yeah, you can come here and we'll take your people, take your money. No, this is a decision to say that we are willing to change and be transformed. and to incorporate their culture and blend it into ours. And we don't know exactly what forms those are going to take, but they are definitely going to be part of the ongoing conversation. They really love the fact that they've painted a rainbow on their pavement and had some struggles with the town about it. They would love to see us have a conversation about, can we paint a rainbow on our driveway? That would be a big conversation here. Maybe we're not ready to. Maybe we will love it. We don't know yet, but that would be a conversation to have.
Yeah, let me comment on that because the attorneys have already mentioned that. You're right on. That there will be a time when we'll have to make a decision with them, and they will have to make their decision too as to what they want to take out of the building, and there will be a time to do that. So yes, that right on, and we're good, and that's part of the game. Thank you.
Hi, John Kendrick.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, this is a great conversation. It's really very sensitive and very wonderful. And when we do, it's amazing how when you join different groups in a blended marriage or other things, you discover, you grow in different ways, which is wonderful. I want to be a devil's advocate for 1 second, though, just to make sure, do we really want to merge? All right. And because I think there's some, real questions. They've got 30 members. What, 15 might be active? Maybe 5 or 10 would decide to drive the 12 minutes to get here. And we're going to change our name, potentially. We're going to incorporate a lot of new traditions. Change is good, change is hard. So I'm not saying no at all, but I'm saying, I do think this is a real thing to think about. I love Andy Durr's signature. Have you all noticed it? He's head of the fundraising, and he says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I think it's not that money, but the love of money, right? So to Bob's point, if we were going to lose money, we probably wouldn't want to merge. Let's say there was no money at all. Would we really want to merge? And also, would the 10 or 15 people end up being, frankly, just as happy if 3 of them came here, 3 of them went to the Harvard Church, 3 of them went elsewhere? So again, I think that we can do a wonderful job, and it would be very enriching to merge. I just don't think we should automatically sort of say, and I appreciate Tricia's comments too, that, she changed the name of the committee because it's not a transition committee yet. So I do think that there's some real discernment that needs to be done. Thank you.
Now, that's what we have to do. Thank you, John. That's excellent. Rebecca over there. Yeah. Ann.
Hi, I'm Ann Wickham, and I'm just curious where UCMH is with staffing and how many they have, and it affects their lives and their.
I came up here because I was waiting for that question.
Go ahead. It's you too.
So UCMH currently has, as I understand it, a half-time consulting minister, and a consulting minister is different from a called minister. I'm a called minister where the people voted, right? A consulting minister is hired by the board on a temporary contract. So he's on a 2-year contract that ends at the end of this year. Then they have a director of religious education who's been around with them for a long time, who's quarter time, Cynthia. You've seen her at some of our worship services before when they've combined with us. And they have a music director, and I forget her name, Chris, do you know? Carolyn, who is part-time and has been with them just for like a year. And my understanding is that was hired under an understanding that this was not going to be a permanent, ongoing, forever kind of position. And then they have an administrator, Chris, who's been with them a long time, who is also quarter-time and does a lot of different administration roles, including publicity. The exploration team members from UCMH have talked about wanting to retain in some way and to wanting to have conversations about retaining are their quarter-time religious education director and their quarter-time administrator. And you may notice that there are 2 areas of our church staffing where we've had to cut back in the last few years for budgetary reasons. And that is that we went from having a full-time DRE plus quarter-time youth director to just 1 position there that's full-time and quarter-time. So that we've decreased that position, that religious education department by quarter-time. And then over in administration plus membership coordinator plus publicity director. This year, we've decreased that to just administrator. So it's pretty harmonious that if we are asked to, and if we financially can, with how the finances work out in the merger, that we can probably accommodate merging those staff teams. And the staff and I have already had conversations about how that might look if that comes to pass. Another important thing to know is that they have 2 ministers emeriti. They have Reverend Alice Anna-Chekanazman, who's just become their minister emerita. And then they have the Reverend Steve Schick, who is their minister emeritus, who some of you may have known from back when he was there for many, many years at Marlborough Hudson. We have 2 emeriti professionals. We have our Reverend Tom Raziello as our minister emeritus, and we have our former DRE, Michelle Cote, as our DRE emerita. And if this becomes a new entity, we should vote as a new body to say we want to name all 4 of those people emeriti of this new institution, so that specifically so that the people from Marlborough and Hudson retain that honorific, which has no financial component to it, but which has denominational components to it, in that those people get to vote on our behalf at General Assembly, should they choose to. And it's also just a deep honor when you've been with a congregation for a long time to be named such a position title. So that's something we'll want to look at if this goes forward.
Dave. Oh, Rebecca was
Hi.
first.
Yeah, sorry, Rebecca Stadolnik. So forgive me if I get the language wrong here, but we need to be really careful about our language if this is truly going to be a merger. I'm hearing phrases like we will absorb them into our culture, and talking about how big churches are helping little churches. I want people to be very aware that our intention is reflected in our language. So if this is truly going to be a merger, we need to make sure our language meets that. We also need to make sure that we are aware that this is a huge opportunity. When I was working as publicity coordinator for this church, and when I worked on the team that helped hire Cindy, some of the things that we talked about was that we really have no way of expanding the diversity of this church because of the demographics of Stowe. But the demographics of Acton and the demographics of Hudson and Marlborough are very different than Stowe. We have a huge opportunity to, our church never wanted to overstep and market ourselves to Hudson and Marlborough because they had a UU church, right? But by merging, that's going to give us an opportunity to reach out to a whole bunch of people who may not have heard of Unitarian Universalism because the UU church there wasn't really big enough to do that kind of outreach. So just 2 things. Think of the opportunities, and please think about the language we use to make this an actual merger.
Dave Kay. I'm trying to wrap my head around the distinction between what I thought was possibly going to happen and what we seem to be laying out here. What I thought might possibly be happening is sort of an informal merger. That is, these people would come over and join us. We would make every effort to welcome them and to accommodate their staff and to memorialize their church and everything that's important about it. But in looking at the financials, as far as we know them now, there seems to be a reasonable chance that financially it's a wash, that we come out with no net gain. And so that makes me ask, do you really have to do a legal corporate merger? What are the advantages of doing a legal corporate merger versus basically just saying, we're going to merge and then doing what we need to do it properly?
Well, let me answer that. First of all, we need it. We don't have all the information, but there was an analysis of their building at $1.5 million, and that means that we come out way ahead financially. I was talking to Rick the other day. I said, there's a possibility that we could get enough money to become a green sanctuary for everywhere that we want and meet our goal with a few $100,000 that we could get from them. Not saying that we should do that. It's just, saying that's a possibility now. So, we can have a new roof on Fellowship Hall and have solar panels and all the things that we want. So that does help. But the thing is that we got to also do that in light of the things that have been mentioned about the emotion of the other people there, that they feel like they're being part of everything and that we're part of them. And so that's not what I'm about. Primarily, I'm about legal and finance. So the legal and finance situation, as far as I'm concerned, is not that complicated. What's going to be complicated is the other pieces. And that's why that my last slide says what it does. So we got to keep that in mind. I don't think we're going to solve the problem here today, but I think we all know what the issues are, and that makes me feel good. So I'm going to sit down because my back is hurting.
I just wanted to reiterate something that Bob said at the beginning. Something that Bob mentioned at the beginning, which is the financial and the asset side of the financial thing. The operational piece is not that complicated, but there is a major asset involved there. And if we don't merge, that asset goes away. And so I think that the legal merger is crucial.
Yeah, if we don't merge that, it goes away in that it goes to the UUA.
Yeah, I think that they really want to merge for that reason. They really would like to be part of a community that gets the assets from their church as part of this church. And I think that's there.
Of their church culture.
And and all those issues, by the way, the issues that Cindy talked about came up in our first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not like we're not thinking about it, but we all have to think about it soon as we have these joint meetings and we get together with them and get to know them and they get to know us and we work on issues together, because that's what it's going to take, working it together. I got to sit down. My back is full.
Yeah.
I got the mic right. I'll get it to you when I'm done. Bill Froberg. Hello. So this is a question that's maybe premature, but just to sort of help maybe expand our thinking to some of the more concrete items that may be involved is, so it's a basic question. If we truly merge, what does that mean about our bylaws? Does it say that we got to sit down and rewrite our bylaws on the basis of a combined understanding and acceptance of what they'll be? Or is it something where we can use our bylaws as a template essentially and just, sort of incorporate or update or append our bylaws with those things that would be relevant, to them? So, just another sort of aspect of this that hasn't been brought up to maybe think about.
So I'll try to answer the bylaw question. I would imagine as part of this process that at the appropriate point, if we decide to move forward, that we are adopting or are adapting our bylaws to meet the needs of the new congregation, which may include language around the name. It may include language around increasing the number of board members in spite of the fact that we just reduced it. I think as part of this, we need to look at, adapting our governance model to meet the needs of the new congregation. I don't know if that's a wholesale rewrite. I know Bob mentioned earlier that as part of this, the attorneys need to look at the bylaws of both organizations. And I'm sure as part of that, there will be recommendations on what a new set of bylaws would look like.
One of the things you might be wondering is what models are out there for us to do this? And that's a question we asked the regional staff, like, have there been any other churches in New England that have done this recently? And their answer was no. The last mergers in New England were like when you merged with Acton and Stowe and Marlborough and Hudson merged, like that they knew of. And so we're really pioneering something that is going to be we're creating this model for how this is done well, all anew right now. And of course, we're going to look back into our own house's history in that process as well. but what I want to say about that is that this is something that a lot of communities out there are facing the potential of. And so the denomination is watching us in good ways as a potential for helping other groups in the future. Whether we make the decision yes or no, this process is important to not just our churches, but to our faith. And so I've been in conversation with the UU World about doing an article on it down the road. And Trek has been in conversation with me, the Lombard Theological School, which is very interested in having the student body learn from his experience here. And so I just want you to know that like, not in a negative way that they're watching us, but that this is really groundbreaking conversations that we're having here, and that it's important in the future of this faith.
Hello.
Roy's been waiting.
Cindy.
Roy's been waiting. Okay.
Cindy, you just, is this on?
Yeah.
Cindy, you just answered my question.
Oh, good.
Because I'm wondering, I think you're doing a great job on all these details, keeping persons and okay.
Like really eat it like
Like
this.
this.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I think the group is doing a great job on considering all the details and have a lot of confidence that you'll do it right. My question was, is there a body of knowledge around the future and where the future is going? For example, we have members in this church from Hudson. We have members in this church, many from Maynard, from Bolton, but we don't call it the First Parish Church of Maynard, Hudson, Bolton, and Stowe and Acton. So we already have some experience with diverse geography, and I'm wondering how that has played into those persons. Things like Zoom. How does Zoom work in? How will Zoom work into the future? More communications remotely. How does as Rebecca said, how does the economy of scale, having a broader context of geography, how do you use that effectively? And I can't believe that somebody, maybe it's the Mormons, haven't done this work of studying diverse communities, putting them together. So you answered the part of the UU, but
yeah, and I'm talking to those congregations in the Detroit area that are working together, and there were congregations in Houston that did some merging together 15 years ago, and we'll I think be reaching out to a larger beyond New England question of that. Unfortunately, the most recent examples of churches that got so small and that they needed to close or merge here chose to close, and they're
sure. But and so that's
right.
So this isn't just a one-off. This is a trend. We're part of a trend.
This is part of a trend.
And I got to believe people are studying that and learning from it and taking action. So just keep in touch. Thank you.
Very much so. Derek.
Perhaps I missed something early on, but why isn't the Framingham UU Church talking to Marlboro Hudson? Because they're right next door. And Stowe is a drive.
Framingham, I haven't measured how far Framingham is from the Hudson building, but I think we are closer. But also there's weird things around old UUA district lines. So I think it used to be before we became a region in Unitarian Universalism of the New England region, we were the Mass Babe district and the Clara Barton district and the Ballou Channing district. And some of those old lines die hard. And particularly in how the ministers chapters still follow those old lines. So the Mass Bay chapter is a different chapter than Clara Barton. For whatever reason, when they drew those lines, Concord was Mass Bay, but Stowe Acton here was Clara Barton. And so I think Framingham might be Mass Bay, Well, Marlboro Hudson is Clara Barton. So that's also partly who we've gotten to know each other before and who has worked together in other ways. So they had been working with us with OWL and with the summer services and those things, and Framingham hasn't been part of that circle.
Just a short thing to add. I did a deep dive into some of the town history, and Hudson, it was actually when they made Hudson, it came out of Stowe and it came out of Marlborough. So that there's also ties that go back there.
Yeah, Chris has done this amazing chart that we're going to be sharing with you later in the fall that shows how the towns are connected and the history of the towns and how the our two churches have a lot of parallels in the way we're both mergers, you know, of previous congregational mergers. So, yeah.
Hi, Susan Perry. I'm just wondering, all of the corporations and legality aside, if either congregation votes not to do this merge, will the members of the Hudson Marlboro Church feel that they are still welcome to join FPC as FPC? Do we have any sense of that?
You know, I think it would be heartfelt. Some people might still come who've built connections. I think fewer probably would. And I think some people would take that as a really hurtful, I'm guessing, but I don't know. Who knows?
Hi, it's me again. There's something that was in the slides, but I don't think anybody touched on apart from that being in the slides. And I know this from being on the endowment committee, but if they don't do something with their church, the UUA owns all their assets.
Yes. If they dissolve and they don't merge and they just dissolve as a congregation, and we have this written into our bylaws too. If we were to say we're dissolving, our assets go to the UUA. And it's actually in the UUA's bylaws that all the member congregations that's true for, whether or not we have it in our individual bylaws.
So that includes the proceeds from the church sale, that includes the $74,000 they have in their UUA funds, as well as the $100,000 that they have in their endowment. So that's a significant loss, I would think, in ability to be able to serve, which is the next question I have.
And then those smaller artifacts, where would they go if they don't have a church home that they're merging with?
Just a follow up on what Rebecca Stodolnik said earlier about this being an opportunity. I think we need to think seriously about how serving the Hudson Marlboro area is extremely different from serving this rural community that has been Stowe Acton. We have a lot of members from Marlboro here. I think I know of at least 5 or 6. Yeah, I live in Marlboro. And I think it's a good idea from that perspective. But by the same token, there are urban issues in Marlboro that we don't have in Stowe and Acton. I remember back when the white supremacists came and marched in front of one of the hotels, which is less than a mile away from my house.
Yeah.
And I tried to get a lot of interest and enthusiasm in what this church could do about responding to that. And, you know, it kind of fell a little bit flat, I think, because we don't think of us as being part of the urban experience that is Marlboro.
Well,
so there's a question in my mind about how we identify how to serve that different kind of community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the reason that also fell flat for me is like, I shouldn't go and minister on another minister's geographic parish area. And so it opens up possibilities and questions. And I think that's really well named, June.
Finished.
All right. It sounds like people are saying, okay, we're done. Thank you all so much for coming. This is just the beginning of conversations we'll continue to have. Oh,